Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everybody, welcome. We are glad to have you with us. Megan will rejoin me in a minute. We'll be answering some questions that you all have submitted during the week, study questions, and we'll also update you on what's been going on around the country on bar exam news. We have a few states that have released results in the last week or so, and we'll be talking about those. And then we will be picking up with the third in our series on anatomy of a bar essay. We're going to be looking at the anatomy of the conclusion or the application paragraph. So I'm pretty excited about that. And Megan, I know you're excited about that presentation as well. We're going to talk about how you write that third paragraph in an essay. And so stick around for that. We've gotten great feedback on that anatomy series, haven't we?
Yeah, it's been wonderful. So we really hope it's been helpful for you guys. We've heard from some people who are appreciating it and learning from it. So that's always the goal.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that in just a couple of minutes. All right, Megan, what's happening in the world of bar exam in this relatively calm period that we're in, right?
Yeah, so we still have results trickling in. The big one this week was Texas. They have not released their statistics yet, so we'll let you guys know when we hear about that. Obviously, I'm really interested to see what their stats look like, given that Texas is the largest state that we've had released so far. So, or maybe Florida might be bigger, huh? But it's one of the big states. Yeah. So I'm curious and excited to see those. Also, we had Arizona, Colorado, Hawaii, and Illinois release their results this week. Man, same trend that we've been seeing all along with pretty dismal looking repeat rates.
What was that, 17% in Illinois for repeaters?
Yeah, 17% in Illinois for a repeater pass rate. That's rough. There's no way to get around it. That is a pretty bad number. And it's not an outlier. And I think this is very interesting that we're seeing these low rates pretty much across the board so far.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning to me. The other, Washington State came in at 11.8%. That was earlier in September. But then Colorado was another state that jumped out at me, 22% repeater pass rate. So again, we're seeing these low repeat pass rates. What do you make of that when you see these really low repeater rates? 20% is about the average that we're seeing across the country for repeat bars.
I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but I definitely want to reiterate for people. I think because the graders do not know who's a repeater and who is a first-time taker, this shows that it's not a bias. They don't know that the person coming in has failed in the past. So what it shows me is that the people who have failed in the past need to do something different because they're continuing to fail. So we're just seeing that over and over again. And so I really want to encourage people. I know we talked about it before. If you are a repeater and you are, particularly if you are in one of these states with these really low repeater pass rates, you probably need to have some coaching of some sort in order to pass. You're probably not going to be able to get there on your own, because I think that's just what we're seeing is that the people who, you do the regular, you do big box bar, whatever, and it doesn't work for you, you probably aren't going to be able to on your own push your way up into the pass list. You are going to need a little bit of help. That's fine. There's no shame in that. You're not good enough, anything like that. It's just, that is going to be something that you probably need someone to help you, usually with your writing. That is generally where we see the problem, is that people are just not really sure how to write with these very small time constraints, how to write a passing bar essay.
Yeah, and we've made our writing coaching pretty affordable for people. You can pay for it over 12 months. You can choose from a variety of different packages and get everything from the personal writing workshop up to 15 or 25 calls with me or 12 calls with Megan if you're a repeat bar taker. There are a lot of different options there. But the thing that I think, and I would share this view with you, Megan, the thing that's most frustrating to me is seeing somebody who's missing by a fairly wide margin. And they may have raised their scores over time, but they're still hitting a ceiling and they've never gotten the coaching that they needed. And I know that there's this sense of urgency that you got to sit for the next exam, take the next test. try again. But there's really no purpose in doing that if you're not changing what you're doing in your studies. And it's not a sign of weakness to say you need help. And it's also not a sign of weakness to say, I can't even afford, even at your rates, I can't afford to add coaching today. And in that situation, what I would tell you is sit out an exam, save your money, and then get the help that you need, because going in and taking the exam and failing repeatedly is so demoralizing, right? It's so hard on people. And we've had incredible success stories of people that have taken the exam double-digit times, but it takes a certain resilience. And for a lot of people, you just start saying, I think I'm going to give up. And yet when somebody passes and I interview them, they always say, never give up, never give up. But also pick your shots wisely and get the help you need. There is no course that I'm aware of in the country that offers as many resources for retakers as we do. There are so many things that we offer that you're just not going to find anywhere else, whether it's Brianna's time management workshop, or it's photo reading, or paraliminals, or the Abundance 4 bar study masterclass, or the coaching. And if you don't avail yourself of those things, I don't know, you might as well be sitting in a big box course, right? You're not getting the help that you really need. And these numbers that we're seeing across the country just continue to say, you're just not going to pass as a repeater statistically until you do something different. So whatever that different is, you got to really analyze that. And we're glad to help you and help put together that plan for you. But I don't know if there's anything that frustrates me more than seeing people just wind up and go back at it again and not change anything.
Yeah, definitely. You got to take a risk and try something more. I know that's hard and scary, but that's what we're here for.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so that's what we know about results. We haven't seen a lot. I think I said last week, my spidey sense was New York was going to release, but of course my spidey sense was completely wrong. They announced that they're going to wait till mid-December. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because mid-December is a punitive date, right? You made the point to me yesterday. How does New York say mid-December when California has way more applicants and they managed to get theirs out by Thanksgiving, right? Does that strike you as a little?
Yeah. New York seems to be blaming it on the fact that it was the online test, and so they have to review the video and things like that. But certainly way smaller numbers than California, who also took an online test. Very strange to me, because of course not getting your results till mid-December means very little turnaround time to be able to study for the February bar. So Jackson, what should people who took the New York test and are maybe not super sure that they had a favorable result, what should they be doing right now?
Okay, well, this is going to be hard love. Not everybody's going to like this. But based on the statistics that we're seeing, if you're a repeat bar taker in New York, statistically, you didn't pass the exam. You just got to start there. I hope all of our students who are repeat bar takers did pass. But I've got to tell you, if I'm looking at it from a pure cold numbers standpoint, 1 out of 5 of you passed and the other 4 did not. Therefore, if you're a repeat bar taker, I would encourage you to begin your studies this week in anticipation of sitting for the February 2022 exam. If you're in our course, you can do that. If you're not in our course, we encourage you to contact us and we'll talk about starting your studies now, pending your results in mid-December. The reality is, if you wait until you get your results in mid-December, you're going to need a few days to process them. Then it's going to be the holidays, and then it's going to be January 2nd, and you are not going to be ready, no way, no how are you going to be ready for that exam in February. So the reality is that if you want to take the February exam, if you think there's a chance you didn't pass, if you're a first-time taker and you think you didn't pass, if you're a repeat bar taker, I would start your studies now. And if you're watching or listening to us later on our podcast, you're not in our course, reach out and talk to us now, because truthfully, if you wait, you're done. You might as well start thinking July of 2022. And I think it's really pretty miserable of the New York bar examiners. I think it's a way to keep people out of the February exam again. Remember, was it a year ago? Was it only a year ago when they just said you couldn't take this exam if you'd taken it 2 times previously and failed? This is in effect doing the same thing, right? They're just making sure that repeat bar takers are not going to be able to take the exam. So I think you have to get started. I know that's not the news people want to hear. If you feel super confident that you passed, great. Again, I would be very cautious, and I'd play it on the the downside. What the worst that happens is you do some studying now, you find out in mid-December you passed, yay, you get the holidays without having to study for the bar. But if you didn't pass, you are light years, and I think that makes a difference. The other thing, of course, and I want to reemphasize this, I am saying you should start now. I am not saying you should wait till November or even early December. You should start now. This is the time to be studying for the February exam, regardless of the jurisdiction you're in. This is the moment. And those of you that think you're going to do this in 8 weeks or 10 weeks are delusional. It's just not happening. So you need to get started right away.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that didn't make any friends, did it?
No, it's okay. It's important information, and I think people know that and appreciate that. And like you said, if you start studying now and you find out that you passed, you are going to be over the moon and not caring one bit about the time that you spent studying. I
remember something you used to talk about. You called gymnesia, when you go to the gym and it hurts, but you feel so good afterwards, you forget how much it hurts. I think it's like barnesia, right? When you pass, you forget how much it hurt that you had to do all that. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. That's the human condition for sure. All right. So let's move on to a few student questions before we get into our essay writing piece for the day. Next is, I've studied the substantive material. I've started the substantive material, and I'm a very slow reader. I also find it hard to decide what to highlight and what not to. You said not to spend too much time reading the material, but I'm not sure how to do that. It's a great question.
Okay. So let's start there. It is a great question. I responded back to the student, but I thought it was really a good question that applies to a lot of different people. The first thing to understand is that how fast you read is actually inverse to comprehension. And what I mean by that is that the studies show consistently that most people in law read about 110 words per minute with less than 50% comprehension. That's not great, okay? Now, what's really interesting in the studies is that when people slow down reading legal or medical, this is the two professions, when they slow down to about 50 words a minute, I think most people assume, oh, if I go 50 words a minute, my comprehension will go up. It does not. It actually drops in half. It goes to 25%. Why? The brain starts wandering, the focus is reduced, there's more inputs coming in, and your brain is just, your brain is the cat with the toy, right? It's got something else to look at. There's some other, or maybe it's cat videos on YouTube. I don't know. Anyway, the result is that your comprehension goes down. So in our course, we want you to read fast. Now, in traditional terms, read fast equals skim, S-K-I-M. But we go a step further. We actually speed that up and we go to photo reading. And in photo reading, you can read literally 25,000 words a minute with 75% comprehension. You'd say, well, no, that's impossible. You can't do it, except that it is possible and people do it all the time. The reason that they can do it is that they're now reading not to the conscious brain, which is very distracted, easily distracted, but they're reading to the non-conscious brain. And by reading to the non-conscious brain, the eyes and the brain can take in so much more information than we can consciously process. So we're literally flipping pages in photo reading. The material is going to the non-conscious, and now the task is to activate what's in the non-conscious. It's literally finding the way to bring that material forward. And we do that through mind maps and through the lectures and the question practice and other techniques. So when this student asked the question about, I want to highlight a bunch of things. Back in my day, we used to carry a bunch of highlighters that looked like the Rainbow Coalition, and you'd highlight every line. But when you were done, it was a mess. It didn't make any sense to anybody. It's the same idea with taking notes. They were just a big, long mess and useless. And so what we've learned over the years is that you have to go faster in order to get better comprehension and understanding. So if you're a photo reader, that's going to be a structured approach for you. If you're not a photo reader, then we want you to skim an outline in a matter of just a couple of hours instead of taking 8 or 10 hours. We want you to read that same material in 3 hours. If you're a photo reader, you're going to read that material in 15 minutes. So you can see the difference there. Now, the student went on to ask if they should invest their money in photo reading, because they said, look, finances are tight and it's hard for me. And I totally get that. But I'll tell you this. When you think about what you've put into law school, what you put into preparation for the bar, what your value of your being a member of the bar versus being a paralegal or a non-barred member is worth, it is a minuscule fraction. It is something you won't even remember a year from now. and it's pretty affordable. And it makes a difference. About 2/3 of our students use photo reading. It makes a difference for them. We see scores go up consistently, and it improves your performance in multi-state. It improves performance in essays. It improves performance in performance tests. And so I really encourage you to do that, to check it out, go to our website, find out, watch some of the videos. Don't take my word for it. Listen to students who used it. Staggeringly great increases in their course scores across all jurisdictions. This is not unique to one jurisdiction or another. But the final piece I want to say, and I said this to the student as well, is stop thinking of yourself as a slow reader. That's a troubling statement, isn't it? Because this person, I'm sure, is not a slow reader. They're just slower than other people they think are reading. And we start putting these labels on ourselves, right? I'm a slow reader. I'm a this. I'm not a good test taker. I'm not a this. Those are the kinds of things that just really concern me because they become these embedded beliefs and then they're hard to move past. So just really encourage you to not do that.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. All right. We have a really good question. I'm so afraid of the feedback on my writing exercise, and my mind tells me I should wait until I know more law to do the questions. That's a very common feeling. I've noticed that I get stuck in the assignments. On the other side, my mind also tells me that I should know more because I've been studying for a while. Any suggestions?
It's a great question. I think in order to learn, you have to submit yourself humbly before the abyss, right? You have to be willing to take the criticism in order to get better. I don't know any way around that. I watch pro athletes who are the best in the world at what they do, and they make a mistake and the coach yells at them. Now, I don't yell, I don't think. I know Megan doesn't yell. We're honest about the feedback because you need to improve, but we're on your side. And making the mistakes now is far less problematic than making them on exam day. And truthfully, if you live in fear of criticism, you've picked the wrong profession because you're going to be criticized every day. And when you submit work to the partner or to the judge or to whomever, to the client, you're going to be critiqued on that work. And so you need to grow a thicker skin. And you have to take it under the standpoint, I think, of I'm trying to learn. And these people are trying to help me learn. And I'm going to just submit myself to that learning, to humble myself and set my ego aside and acknowledge that I'm trying to do something that's hard. Because it is hard. And I know for this particular student, English is not their first language. So it makes it doubly hard, maybe triply hard. But you don't get better not doing it. And so I would say to this student or any other student facing that demon, you just got to relax and let go of it. Because trying to get ready and make it perfect or even better before you send it to us really defeats the purpose of having us help you.
Yeah. And always remember that as you're writing essay responses now, that is part of the study process. So even if you're not in coaching, you need to be writing essays. And it's not just to practice, oh, do I have the timing down or can I figure out the essay? It's to say, okay, now I'm going to review the essay. Oh, I do not understand that concept of law. Oh, I've never seen that. I never thought about that before. Oh, okay, now I see when they're talking about this subject, this is the fact pattern or one fact pattern that I might notice that in, and here's how it works together with it. Not just that practice essays, they're not really a finished product where you might think, as you're saying, it's a great question. Oh, I should know more law before I do the questions, or when I do the questions, I should have known the answers because I've been studying. Your final product is the bar exam. We're not there yet. So you need to take the studying. It's the process that you're in the middle of right now. You are not at the end yet.
Yeah, I agree. So there you go. All right. Well, good question. And I hope that helps.
Definitely. All right. So the last question that we have is someone who, I'm not sure, Jackson, was this a student who, did you make a results video for them? They said, it's my first time in my 5 attempts at taking the bar that someone has explained my results to me and then told me what I should be working on, what I should be doing. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to have that comment out there because I know that when people get results back, sometimes it's so devastating and disappointing. And I know that they don't always want to share that with us. I think it's to the point of the writer in the chat box that I'm embarrassed by this. I don't want to do it. And yet when you send your score results into me, what I do is I record a video for you. I go through your score sheet depending on the jurisdiction, there's more or less information. And I talk about how to manage that score or to interpret it and understand it, but also the suggestions that we make. As Megan and I were talking about, there are things that we think you need to do differently. And yet you may be saying to yourself, I don't know what that thing is to do differently. So we want to give you that insight. So I just want to encourage you, if you don't get a favorable result, send us your score sheets. Let us look at them. This is part of what we do. This is our primary business, is to work with repeat bar takers. You're not going to show us anything we have not seen before. And it's a judgment-free zone. So I just wanted to make that comment and encourage people to send in those score sheets.
So Jackson, let's talk now. We can get into our essay writing. And sure. I know today we're going to talk about the conclusion and what do you do with your final paragraph? How do you explain? What are you supposed to put in there? People always feel like, gosh, wasn't it good enough? I just tell you who won and then I move on to the next thing. Yeah, let's talk about it. What do we do?
So I'm going to jump off camera here. I think Megan's going to do the same. And then we're going to jump in here. And bear with me 1 second. I'm still here. Don't anybody leave me yet. Okay. And there we go. Hopefully you can see on your screen. Today we are looking at the third in our series that we call Anatomy of a Bar Exam Essay. But today it's the Anatomy of a Bar Exam Conclusion, or the application paragraph. It's the third paragraph in the writing. And we want to take you through the steps of writing that third paragraph. Now, in previous trainings, we've looked at how to analyze the question generally. And then last week, we looked at how to analyze and make arguments. And if you haven't watched those 2 lectures, I encourage you to do that. I would also encourage you to watch this rather than listen to it so that you can see visually. But today, what we want to do is move forward to the next piece. And then next week, we'll actually loop back around to the first paragraph called the fact paragraph. So we are getting there for those of you that were curious about that. The question that we're going to use today is the same one we used last week. And if you remember that, it was in criminal law. It's a UBE question. It's an actual bar question. And we wanted to stay with the same question because we want to build on the arguments that we talked about last week. Now, for those that don't remember the question or perhaps didn't see the earlier episodes, I'm going to go through very briefly and read the question to you. We'll talk about each paragraph. I'm not going to say too much about the question itself at this point because Megan and I have already done the analysis of the problem and the analysis of the arguments. But here's the question that we've got in front of us. A police officer on routine traffic patrol watched suspect drive by. Suspect was in compliance with all applicable traffic laws except the state seatbelt law. The state motor vehicle code provides that police officers have discretion to make an arrest for any traffic infraction, including a violation of the state seatbelt law. Officer had never stopped a driver merely for violating the seatbelt law. However, officer knew that suspect was a reputed drug dealer and stopped suspect's vehicle, hoping to uncover evidence of a more serious crime. Now, it's important to remember this is the first paragraph of the question, but very often in bar questions, each paragraph will typically be tied into one call to the question. So it's an easy way to think about it and ask yourself what's going on in this particular paragraph. And again, I'll reference you back to our previous lectures to give you a feeling for that, and we'll cover the arguments here in a minute. Now, in the second paragraph of the question, officer directs suspect to get out of his vehicle, handcuffs the suspect, and tells the suspect that he's under arrest for violating the seatbelt law. Immediately afterward, officer looked through the driver's side car window and noticed a clear plastic bag containing white powder on the front seat of suspect's car. Officer asked suspect, "Are those drugs yours?" And suspect responded, "No, that cocaine isn't mine." Officer then opened the car door and removed the bag of white powder. So again, we've moved from the stop, the traffic stop. Now we have the scene, something on the front seat of the car that looks like drugs, and we have a statement, the cocaine isn't mine. So again, a lot's going on in this paragraph. It's probably going to tie into the very specific calls of the question in a minute. In the third paragraph of our question, officer transports suspect to the police station for booking. An hour later, detective visits suspect in the police station holding cell to attempt an interview. Detective read suspect his Miranda rights, and suspect stated that he understood his Miranda rights, but nonetheless would answer detective's questions. Suspect voluntarily answered detective's questions for about 5 minutes and then said, quote, "I'm not sure about this. Maybe I need a lawyer," close quote. Detective did not seek clarification of suspect's statement, but continued to question suspect, who ultimately confessed to possessing the cocaine found in his car. So again, the one point I want to make here, and we've said it before, you want to be aware of who these parties are. We started with someone named officer, but now we've got someone named detective. That turns out to be significant. So don't read so quickly that you miss or read over those kinds of things. All right, and now we get what we call the tee-up paragraph, which is the state charged the suspect with misdemeanor violation of the seatbelt law, so that's one crime, and felony drug possession. Suspect has moved to suppress all of the state's evidence, alleging, and we could put numbers in front of this, 1, an unlawful stop, 2, an unlawful arrest, 3, an unlawful seizure of evidence, and 4, multiple Miranda violations. Now, the examiners don't put those numbers in there, but let me call you in, Megan. That's not a bad idea, isn't it? When you see something that's got all these different parentheticals in it or clauses to number them in your own brain, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even what I would note too, if I was doing that, which I would for sure, if I had it on a piece of paper, I would be putting little numbers next to them or above them. But when it gets to the Miranda violations, I would also note in my head, it says, and multiple Miranda violations, which probably tees me off of, I might need to break that piece down further because we're talking about multiple violations. I'm going to have to, I just want to keep it on my radar as I'm reading. Now, do they all stem from the same general conflict where I can keep them all together, or are they different conflicts and I'm going to need to break them apart? So that's just a hint for when you're going through it. You might not know how it's going to end up, but you definitely want to be aware when you see words like multiple violations that it may be
good point.
conflicts.
Definitely good point. All right, so now we get to the call of the question. And in the call of the question, we've got 4 numbered calls of the question, but keep in mind Megan's point here. Question 1 is, did the traffic stop and subsequent arrest violate the suspect's constitutional rights? Question 2 is, did the officer's seizure of evidence from the suspect's car violate the suspect's constitutional rights? Question 3 is, did the officer's questioning of the suspect violate the suspect's Miranda rights? And then question 4 is, should suspect's confession to detective be suppressed? Now, remember, we just went through those 4 things and we said there's a multiple Miranda problem. And it makes me wonder about that final 4th call of the question about suspect's confession to detective. Because of the fact pattern, seems like that's where our second Miranda problem comes in. So again, we can see how the calls of the question line up with that tee-up paragraph, but also line up pretty closely with the paragraphs of the answer, or the question, don't?
Yeah, definitely. And that's not unusual to.
So this is a pretty logical problem up to this point. All right, now, having said that, once you reach this point, we've been telling you all along that one of the keys here is to not panic. Don't go into the panic mode, but keep calm. And I want to just reemphasize that again, because the whole process of writing the essay is about maintaining your composure. And I wanted to just make it really clear. Do not overthink this problem. Keep it simple. Everything that Megan and I have been telling you about this process has been in simple terms, and we're not going to overcomplicate it for you again today. So you've just read the problem and the question. You know how to analyze arguments because you watched last week's lecture, and you know how to analyze the overall question because you watched 2 weeks ago's lecture. Now we're going to go and really put the whole package together, I think. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to be thinking today about how you write the conclusion. And remember, it's not that you write the conclusion first. You've done these other steps that we've talked about, but now you're getting to the part where you want to think about the conclusion. And I love the conclusion paragraph because it is the simple explanation of the work you've done before. It's not, oh my God, what do I write here? Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. It should flow naturally from everything that you've written before it. Yeah. And if it doesn't, you should probably practice that because it's going to make your life a lot easier and definitely leads to a more successful essay.
Yeah, and just keep it simple. You don't have to make this complicated. So now we're going to break this down for you a little bit. When we write the conclusion paragraph, we're weighing the 2 sides of the argument. We're the judge, if you will. And there are 3 components to this paragraph. So if you're taking notes, this is what you want to write down. In the conclusion or application paragraph, there are 3 things you must do. Number one, you must answer the question, who wins the dispute? Oh my gosh, this makes me crazy when people write these conclusions and I finish reading them and I still can't tell who they think wins. Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah. And what I actually see a lot of that I'm always counseling people about is don't just tell me woman wins. That is not particularly helpful. Tell me, what does it mean that woman wins? What's the outcome, right? The motion, woman is correct, and the motion should be denied.
Oh yeah, finish the thought. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like context is everything. And so sometimes people are too brief, right? Yeah, you're right. Woman wins. Suspect wins. What are we talking about? So you got to be fairly specific there. But we're going to develop this idea even a little more distinctly, because the second thing that goes into this paragraph is, why do they win? And it's this beautiful, lovely word, because. Because. I know you hardly ever use that word with your children, do you?
Yeah, never.
Why, Mom? Because. No. In our process, what we're trying to do here is not only explain who wins the dispute, and the specific dispute, but why do they win it? We need a because statement. And you're going to see examples of that in a minute. But the reasoning is the because statement. And so often I get these conclusions. I might even get a who wins the dispute, but I don't get a reason for it. I just get some gibberish that follows it, for lack of a better word. And it's hard for the examiners to give you much credit for that. Sometimes it's as though the writer flipped a coin and said, head, suspect wins, tail, state wins. Suspect wins because they had a better argument. What? Don't do that. You need to give us some real reason, and that reason is going to flow from the arguments that you made. So you want to add anything to that piece of the...
Yeah, I think that this is a piece that tends to trip a lot of people up, which I do think it's because, like you just said, they're overthinking it. So it's part of why we keep hammering that drum, because they're get wrapped up in trying to sound like a lawyer or use legalese or whatever it is. And really, this is just explain it to me. Just tell me, if I was your friend or your family member who wasn't a lawyer, you've given me the law. So now tell me who is right under that law and why are they right? Just talk to me as your reader, as a normal person, and explain the thoughts that already went through your head. Show your work, right? Just show your work like a math problem. And tell me, you may have gone through those thoughts very quickly in your own mind, but lay them out explicitly for your reader, because of course the grader needs to see how you went through those thoughts, and not that you just took a 50-50 shot in the dark and got lucky.
I think it's the Hansel and Gretel approach of leaving the cookie crumbs. Here's how I got here. So definitely important. So that's the second piece of the paragraph. Then there's a third piece of this paragraph that hardly ever shows up, and that is add additional facts, arguments, and law that support your conclusion. So sometimes what happens is I'll read a third paragraph where they tell me who wins the dispute, and they tell me why they win. There's a good because statement, and then that's all that goes in the paragraph. But the reality is that there are additional facts and arguments and law in many cases that support what you've already written. And this is your chance to elaborate. It's your chance to show your legal chops. This should be the part that you really get excited about, I think, of the entire essay, because up until now, everything has been pretty formulaic. But this third step of the third paragraph really is your chance to say, here's the way I really think and analyze this. Here's what else would be important to fill out this entire picture.
Definitely. It's the hardest part of the essay for most people. It's also the least formulaic, which is part of why it's hard, right? Because they can't give you the magic like words that you say. But I will say this is where, if you have any requirements under the law for the law to apply, which of course is every law, there might not be factors, but maybe there's factors. Maybe it's just something implicitly in the law that assumes if this is the case, if this is the scenario, then what you want to do is you want to show me, are those factors present here or are they not? And walk, again, show your work, have that trail of breadcrumbs, and walk your reader through why it is that this law is applicable in this case or is not applicable in this case.
Yeah. And so these are the elements of the third paragraph. Nothing else goes in the third paragraph. I know that people like to throw in all sorts of other stuff, but this is all that goes in the third paragraph. Now, that third paragraph could be relatively short. It could be longer if it's a more complicated problem. I think of the third paragraph as a balloon. You can squeeze it and inflate it, or you could shrink it down. It gets bigger or smaller depending on the problem. It is the most variable paragraph. When we talked about the arguments, we talked about 3 or 4 sentences in the argument paragraph. When we get to the facts paragraph next week, we're going to talk about 1 or 2 sentences, but this paragraph really has the ability to be much more expansive. So don't be afraid to put some sentences in here. Okay, with that structure in mind, let's take a look at how this happens. And again, I want to remind you, you do not need to make this more complicated than necessary. You've seen this slide every single time because I consistently see people making their essay writing unbelievably complicated and difficult. And mostly that's coming from the IRAC style of writing. You just don't need to do that. So let's keep it simple. Don't make it more complicated. Okay, so what we're going to do is take this first argument that we did last week in this question, and I'm going to summarize it for you the way that we would have done it using this approach of the first style of arguments. So remember, this has to do with the stop and arrest. So here's the way I think the argument might play out. Suspect will argue that the officer only stopped him because the officer knew him as a known drug dealer. Now here's our rule of law, and remember, we're using the generalized statement first. Under the Fourth Amendment, a warrantless stop and search is illegal. Now we go on. Officer will argue that he had probable cause to stop suspect because the apparent violation of the seatbelt law. A traffic stop and arrest with probable cause, this is our rule, does not violate the Fourth Amendment even if the offense was minor and the stop served as a pretext for investigating other criminal wrongdoing. Now you remember last week we talked about the idea, and Megan used this concept of a funnel. So what we've got here is a funnel style argument. We've got the suspect's argument in the first sentence, and then the very generalized rule of law around the Fourth Amendment. Then we've got the officer's argument as our third sentence, and now a narrowing or a redefining of that law more specifically in order to give us our second rule of law statement. So that's the argument that's in front of us. And the thing that we have to do now is take that argument and move to our conclusion in order to explain which of those arguments we think will prevail and why. Okay, so remember, the first thing we said in the application paragraph was who wins. So the first thing I would say here is that the officer's stop and subsequent arrest did not violate suspect's constitutional rights. That's a pretty clear answer to the question that was asked in the essay. Is that clear enough to help the reader, Megan, in your view, know what we're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I always like to answer the call of the question pretty directly because it makes sure that you've actually answered the call of the question and that you're on topic.
Yeah, so we're actually using the language of the question itself. Now remember, our next statement, though, is why. And so we begin with the word because, and we would say here, because the officer had probable cause to stop the suspect for violating the seatbelt law. Here, the arrest was constitutional because officer had probable cause based on his personal observations to believe the suspect was committing a traffic violation, and the state seatbelt statute permitted an arrest. So now we have a pretty good understanding of why we've reached that conclusion. Does that satisfy the because need of this paragraph?
Yeah, I think what I want to point out is that what this does is not just restate exactly what you told me ahead of it. You are bringing the facts into it and applying them to the law.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We're adding something new here. We're not just repeating. And I think that that's an important point to make. It's also important to understand that we've expanded this why piece so that there's no doubt of what the reasoning was, but we're not done yet. And this is where a lot of people stop. They would give us just that first sentence and this second sentence and then move on. But I think you're giving up points. You answered the question at this point, and you get, I think this is how you get to a 3 answer on a 6-point scale. But if you want the 4, 5, or 6, I think you got to go a step further. So let's look at the next part of it. What are the additional facts, law, and argument? And here's one possibility. There are many that could be added. But the stop and subsequent arrest, we would say, were constitutional despite the fact that the traffic infraction was minor and the officer had never previously arrested anyone for a seatbelt violation. In addition, the stop and arrest were constitutional even if officer used the seatbelt violation as a pretext to investigate criminal wrongdoing based on the officer's knowledge that suspect was a reputed drug dealer. In other words, what we're trying to do is to say, look, we get that it was a pretextual stop. It was a minor traffic infraction. However, because the law says that is a misdemeanor and you can be stopped and arrested for it, the officer was acting within their rights. And so what you're doing is recognizing to the grader that you see the entire argument, but you're reaching a conclusion based on the law. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I want to point out two things that I think you did here for students. One is you brought in facts, and so you've already dealt with your core facts, right? But this is bringing in additional facts that are really helpful in order to fill out or flesh out the argument that you're making. And the second thing that you're doing here that I really don't see enough of, and I'm always telling people I want to see, is you are rebutting the other law, or you're rebutting the other side's argument. So you are acknowledging their argument and you're telling us why it's not applicable in this case or why that law isn't, whatever it is. You're saying, yes, it's true that the officer has never previously arrested anyone for this violation. That doesn't matter because of this. Yeah. Yes, even if the officer, it was pretextual stop. That's the other side's going to say, he just did it because of the reputation as a drug dealer. Doesn't matter. You knock down that argument and explain why it's not right. Again, it's the breadcrumbs. It's the thinking of it, showing your work like a math problem. Like you are showing every step of your thought process. Because as a writer, for the students, you all probably think these things in your head when you're going through the question. But if they don't make it onto the page, they will not get graded. Okay, you don't get credit for thinking the thought in your head on the essay. It's got to show up in your actual answer.
That's really a great point. The thoughts that are in your head, you can't get points for. And so you've got to be explicit. You just got to tell the reader what's in your brain. And so often we see that as coaches, we see people saying, well, that's what I intended to say. That's what I was thinking about. And yeah, you can't get credit for it unless you put it on the computer screen. So this process, you need to practice in order to do it. And so you can see it wends its way through. So the 3 steps were who wins and why, and then what are the additional facts, law, and argument. So that's our first step of the first question. And we're going to do this again and show you. The second call to the question that we wanted to deal with had to do with the Sixth Amendment question of needing a lawyer in that second set of Miranda questioning. And so here's how the argument might be laid out. Hopefully I'll get it right this time. Suspect will argue that he revoked his waiver of an attorney being present during investigation when he said, quote, "I'm not sure about this, maybe I need a lawyer." Now, the rule of law: if an arrestee makes an unambiguous and unequivocal request or demand for an attorney, the police have to cease interrogation and honor the request. And then the detective would argue that the request was ambiguous because of the word maybe. So, Megan, what kind of a form of argument is this that we're looking at?
Yeah, so this one is where you had your type 2, I believe it was last week, where you've got the broader argument of on the side of the suspect and the law that applies, and then the detective's counter argument, but it's the same law that applies to both. They're using the same law. The argument is really about this. Was it ambiguous and unequivocal? They're not arguing about which law applies. They're arguing about how to apply the law.
Yeah. And so this is the second form of the argument. So if you're going back to last week's, you'll see it in that structure. So now with that argument in mind, we have to get to our conclusion, right? It's not enough to just make the argument. We have to explain. So as you're thinking about it, so here's your moment, your Jeopardy moment. Who's going to win this argument? Let's take it apart step by step. So the first part of the application paragraph is who wins. And I would say the statements made at the police station will not be suppressed because they were given after a valid voluntary waiver of an attorney being present for the interrogation, and no valid revocation was made by the suspect. In other words, the state wins, right? The statements are going to come in. They are not going to be suppressed. And again, remember, I'm answering the call of the question here in my who wins statement. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So we've got the who wins piece, but that's not enough. So the next step is why. And the reason, the because, is because suspect's statement that he might want an attorney was too ambiguous to require detective to cease interrogation. Not complicated, is it? That's my reasoning. You might agree, you might disagree, you might say, well, wait a minute, that wasn't too ambiguous at all, but that's the reasoning that I'm. And I think when we say it that clearly, then what we're saying is, here, I've set it up for you, I've reached this conclusion, here's my reasoning. But now I'm hoping that you're starting to say, but isn't there more to say about this? Isn't that, okay, so that's your reasoning, but don't you want to tell me more? Does it feel like that to you?
Yeah, definitely. This should leave you. I hope that everyone's feeling that way, that they read this and go, well, that kind of begs the question, right? We're like, what's ambiguous? Why was it too ambiguous? I want to know more. I want to hear more about why this is the way that it is.
I'm glad you asked. Okay. Additional facts, law, and argument. The suspect's confession made after he said, I'm not sure about this, maybe I need a lawyer, will not be suppressed. A Sixth Amendment demand has to be clear and unequivocal. And you could go on and say more about the word maybe not being clear and unequivocal, that maybe he really did or maybe he didn't. And this is one of those opportunities where, based on the timing that you've got, I would at least put in the sentences that are here in my third paragraph. And then if I had additional time, when I'd finished the entire call of the question, all 4 or 5 parts, I might come back up here and say a little bit more about this idea of maybe and whether maybe is an unequivocal word. And it obviously is not. And so this is one of those opportunities where you put in the framework and enough to get yourself 4, maybe 5 points on that part of the question. And then if you have more time, go in and fill it in further. Is that something that you would consider doing here?
Definitely. And looking at the question, this part was worth 25% of your grade on it. And so definitely, I think you want to spend a little bit of time on it, right? You definitely don't want to overwrite the easier answers or the easier questions, the less complicated, and make sure that you dive in as deep as you have time for on these types of questions.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to jump in and go deeper if you've got time. Now, on the other hand, don't write 3 or 4 more sentences here if you've still got 4 questions to answer, because that's always a danger. You overwrite it. The overwriting that happens for most people happens in call to the question 1 or 2 because they're eager and ready to go. And then by the time they get to the end, we're getting just a little snippet. So you want to make sure that you're balanced all the way through and get in the key pieces and then go back and fill in as you need. All right. Okay. Anything else you want to add to that particular call to the question?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. So question 3 had to do with the cocaine Miranda statement. And here the suspect argued that their statement, the cocaine isn't mine, should be excluded from evidence because the statement was made after their arrest, but prior to Miranda warnings. The rule is that a person under arrest is in custody and must first receive Miranda warnings before being subject to interrogation. Officer will argue that the suspect waived his Miranda rights by making the statement voluntarily. Now, this is a form of the third kind of argument. There is no dispute about the law. It's the Miranda rule. And there's really not even a very good argument to be made by the officer in this case. It's a pretty straightforward application. That's an easy one to write your conclusion paragraph. Because when we get to the conclusion paragraph, who wins? Well, the suspect. And I think almost all of you would know that. The suspect will be successful in excluding the statements that were made to the officer after the arrest. Why? Because there was a custodial interrogation that involved express questioning of suspect by officer before reading the suspect his Miranda rights. It's a very straightforward application of the rule. Do we need to add a lot more for facts, art, law, and arguments? Not much. What we could say is officer arrested suspect and then interrogated suspect, asking him, are these drugs yours, without first providing Miranda warnings. In other words, a little bit more of the facts that are involved. So as we wrap up this idea of the third paragraph, 3 things to keep in mind. The first thing is tell the grader who wins the dispute. Secondly, explain why you reached that conclusion, follow the footsteps. And third, add any additional information that supports your conclusion. All right, so that's what we're talking about. I hope that makes sense. I think understanding this third paragraph is really important because if you don't do that, you're just not going to get the points you need. If everything else goes right and you mess up the third paragraph, you just can't do very well.
Yeah, definitely. So let us know, guys, if you have any questions like in this coming week. Hope that was helpful. Certainly, this is all stuff as well that you get to get more in depth with us. If you do coaching, if you do personal writing workshop, we talk about all these kinds of things. If this is making you realize, oh, I don't think I understand how to write this as well as I thought I did, just get in touch with us. We're here for whatever you guys need, any help you need.
Yeah. Next week, we'll come back and we'll talk about the anatomy of the fact paragraph. I hope you'll stick with us for that. And I hope that you go back. If you haven't seen these earlier episodes, make sure you check them out. The whole series, I think, is going to be really valuable to people. So thank you, Megan, for being with us this week. Thanks to all of you who are with us live today. We appreciate it. And we will see all of you next week. And keep your studies going. Keep going. We're about to hit that. We're right outside 4 months until February. So this is definitely the time to begin really starting your studies. So have a great week, everybody. We'll see you again
Thanks for listening and watching
Bye-bye.
the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.